Hello from So Fabulous Fabrics. My name is Vicky and today I'm going to share with you how I made my latest pattern, which is the Fresh Linen Mini Quilt. And here it is. As you can see, there are 6 different blocks to make and they cover 8 different patchwork skills. So it's a really good skill builder for someone who is starting out on their patchwork journey. As I was making some practice blocks, I wanted to do something with them rather than make another mini quilt or wall hanging. So I was on Instagram and I found a tutorial by Arabesque Scissors which shows you how to use small blocks, which these are, to make pot holders. So I thought, that would be good. So that's what I decided to do. So I've used 2 of my blocks that I've designed and I've made these very cute pot holders with them. So if you look below the video, I will have a link there to find the tutorial which is put on Instagram. For this project, the tools you will need is a quilting ruler, a fabric marker pen, a rotary cutter, some fabric scissors, a little roller or something to press your seams, some clips and or some pins, doesn't matter which, or both, your pressing mat and an iron. The skills we will be learning about in this project today is the 4 patch block, which is just there. Half square triangles, we'll be doing them 2 at a time, 4 at a time and 8 at a time. So we'll be doing 3 different ways of preparing them. Flying geese, which we will be doing 4 at a time. Triangles in a corner. Triple triangle squares, which are these ones just here. And diamond in a square, which would be that one there. So we've got lots of different skills that we're going to learn with this project. This block is the Road to Oklahoma block. For this one, you will learn to do half square triangles 4 at a time and a 4 patch block. So just taking my fabrics, we've got fabric D and fabric E, and we're going to pop those right sides together. Just make sure I've got that on the right side. Now we're going to be stitching a scant 1/4 inch all the way around the perimeter of this square. So I'm just going to pop a couple of pins in just to stop it from moving while I do that. So I'll just get them straight together first of all. Okay, and then I'll go to the sewing machine and just get that sewn. Once you've stitched round your square, we're going to cut it in half across the diagonal, and then we're going to cut it in half again. So this is going to complete your 4 half square triangles. So these 4 half square triangles have been made oversized so we can trim them down. So first of all, we're just going to press them open, and I'm going to press my seam over to the navy fabric so as it won't be seen so much. So measuring one of the squares, it will just tell me how much I need to trim off. So okay, that's fine. So finding the 45-degree angle on your ruler, you're going to place that on this edge just here where the two fabrics are sewn together, and then they're small pieces, so and I've got big fingers. Right, so we'll lay that on so I can see roughly how much I'm going to need to cut off. But what you need to do is you need to cut more or less equal amounts off each side, otherwise the middle of it will, the diagonal part will be a little bit out of line. So just using your eyes and just sort of estimating how much that might be, you need to move your ruler. So in this case I'm moving my ruler upwards because this line on here excuse me, still needs to be on top of where the two fabrics are stitched together. So I'm just going to move it up slightly, and then I can cut this little edge off here. And then swapping it to the opposite side, which is very important. You want to do the opposite side first of all before you move to the other two sides. You'll lay your black line on the edge, on the left hand edge of your square, and then trim that amount off. And then doing the other two sides, again finding the 45-degree angle on your ruler and just measuring where that is, so you've got a rough idea how much you need to cut off. So this time we'll just be moving the ruler downwards, and then we will cut the small piece off on the right hand side, and you've still got a little piece on the left hand side here ready to cut off. And then swap that over, and again 45-degree line up the bottom side and the top to the size it should be, and that's slightly off the center there, and then just trim the excess fabric. So I'm going to do the other ones. I'd already done one, so I've got two there, and I'm going to do the other two. For the 4 patch block, you're going to need fabric A1 and fabric B1, and we're going to place them right sides together, and then we're going to stitch a scant 1/4 inch on each side, so just top and the bottom, and then we'll come back and we'll move on to the next step. Once you've stitched your two sides, we're going to then cut it in half. So I'll just turn it that way, and then just measure your block again to make sure it's the size that it should be, and then just measure from one end into the middle, and then just cut it in half. Then if you just unfold your two halves and just press your seams to the darker side of the fabric, and then we're going to place the two halves together, right sides together, And the blue fabric is going to go on top of this greeny creamy fabric here. And then you can nest your seams at the top and pop a pin in, or use some clips, whichever you prefer. And we'll just make sure that's nested at the bottom as well. And then we're going to stitch again along the top and the bottom using a scant 1/4 inch. Once we've stitched both sides, we're ready then to cut it in half again. So finding the middle, just cut your piece in half. And then when you open them up, you've got 2 4-patch blocks. So we'll just press the seams to one side and then they are done. Following step 4 on the pattern, we're going to stitch fabric C1 to the right of one of the half square triangles, and we're going to stitch D1 to the left of one of the half square triangles. And if you follow the pattern, then this is the way round you need to stitch them. Once we've stitched those 2 sets together, we're going to stitch them together to each other, and you're going to be making 2 of these. And now we're ready to assemble the block. So following the layout, we're going to be stitching those 2 together, and then those 2 together, and then I will stitch the 2 sets together along this horizontal line, and then that'll be finished, but we'll come back and have a look once it's done. There we have our first block finished, the Roads to Oklahoma. This is the odds and ends block. The skills you will learn for this block are the 4-patch block and half square triangles. First of all, we're going to do a 4-patch block. So we did this with the last block that we did, the Road to Oklahoma. So you can follow those instructions or just follow the instructions on the sheet. I'm not going to repeat it again in this part of the video, only to say to you that we're going to be making 4 this time, because there's there's 1 in each corner of the block. So I'm going to get those done, and then we'll come back and we'll move on to the next step. There are our 4-patch blocks completed. So next we're going to move on to half square triangles. So you need C2 and D2, and on the back of C2 I'm going to draw a line horizontally across, and then placing the 2 fabrics right sides together, I'm going to sew a scant 1/4 inch either side of that line, and then that will give us 2 half square triangles. So using your ruler and your rotary cutter, or scissors if you want to, doesn't really matter, just cut that in half along the line, and then just press open, or sorry, fold open, and just press, and then you'll have your 2 half square triangles. Next, we're going to move on to step 5, which is the beginning of assembling the block together. So you're going to need A1 and B1. And you'll need to stitch them together, one of each, with a scant 1/4 inch, and then you will have 4 sets all together. There we have the 4 units stitched together of A1 and B1. So we don't need 2 of them. And taking 2 of the units, we're going to stitch 2 4-patch units, one either side of these ones. So we'll get those done, and then we are ready to do the piece that goes into the middle, because this is the top and the bottom. The next part of the block we're going to do is the centre. So you'll need your 2 half square triangles, and you'll notice that I've just trimmed off the little ears from the corners. So you'll need 2 of D3. So we're going to stitch one either side, and then when we've done that, we will move on to the next step, which is going to be attaching one of each of these strip sets to each side of the centre of the block. There we have the top, the middle and the bottom ready to be stitched together. So when you turn them over, you want to make sure that you've got the seams going in the opposite direction so as you can nest them nicely. So for the middle one, I'm going to have mine facing one to the right, one to the left, and then the 2, the one at the top and the one at the bottom, I'm going to press them so they are inwards. And then they should nest nicely when you go to sew them together, and then that will be your block finished. Our next block is the mosaic block. For this one, you're going to learn to do half square triangles 4 at a time and square in a diamond. Here are my fabrics for the mosaic block. So we've got A1, B1 and B2, C1, D1, D2 and D3. So what we're going to start with is we're going to do half square triangles 4 at a time, as we did for the Road to Oklahoma block. So I'm just going to carry on and prepare mine. So you're going to need B1 and D1 to do these, but the instructions are on the pattern and also on the video for the Road to Oklahoma block. Once you've finished stitching your 4 half square triangles, you just need to press your seam across to the darker fabric. They're then ready to trim if necessary. So following the size on the pattern, if you need to trim them, then you can follow the video on the Road to Oklahoma block. That shows you how I trim my half square triangles. So for the next step, you're going to need fabric A1, and you should have 4 of these. And we're going to just cut them across the diagonal, so then we'll have 8 triangles. We're now going to stitch 2 of the triangles that we've just cut onto each of the half square triangles. So if you have a look on the block that's on the pattern, you can see which way round your half square triangles need to be to place your A1 fabric onto. So this one is going to go on like that, and I'm going to pop that on the top so it's right sides together, and we'll be stitching along this line. So your two edges, one edge will be flush to the top of the half square triangle and the other one to the right hand side. So I'm just going to pop a pin in there, so when I get to the machine I know which side I'm stitching, because I can tell you that there are many times when I take it to the machine and I stitch the wrong side. So I've popped a pin in, and then I'm also, once we've done that, we'll flip it back and press it down, and then we're going to stitch the other one onto the other side in exactly the same way. So I will get all 4 of those done, and press them open as you go. So press the first triangle open before you stitch the second one on. It will make it easier. And I always press my seam so as it's going towards the square. This means then that you've got this little piece just here, this little tail, which just adds as an extra bit of buffer for when you're stitching your next piece on. Okay, so I'll go and get those stitched. There are the 4 corners of the block completed. For the next step, you will need D3 and B2. We're going to first of all cut D3 into 4 triangles. So you just want to go across the diagonal. And then across the diagonal again. So you're going to have 4 triangles from this 1 square of fabric. And then taking B2, you need to mark it somehow, because what we're going to do is we're going to fold it in half one way. Doesn't matter which way you start. So you could either just put a crease in it, or you could put a pin in it as well, because what we need to do is we need to place one of your triangles right sides together to the little square, and we need it to be in the middle. So you could put the point on your line that you've just creased, which is quite difficult to see on this dark fabric. So I'm going to pop a pin just in the middle there. Hopefully that will help me to see where the crease is. Or you could measure, so you could measure where the middle part is, or fold it in half and again pop a crease in. So then when you pop the 2 pieces right side together, if you find your 2 creases, or where your pin is in the middle, because the point of the triangle needs to be in the center of that square, then we'll just pop a pin in the top there. And then we're going to stitch a scant 1/4 inch seam across the top of the square there. And then once you've done that, if you do the same with a second triangle on the opposite side, again right sides together, then once you've stitched them, just fold them back out and press them so the so the fabric will be facing downwards like that, so you can see the whole of the triangle on both of them. And then once you've done the 2, you can then do the opposite 2. So again, right sides together. Find the centre of your square, right sides together, stitch that one on, flip it back and press it, and then do the one on the opposite side. So I'll get the first two done, and then we'll come back and just make sure we're going in the right direction, and then we'll do the opposite two. That's the first two triangles stitched on. So we now want to stitch one onto the top and one onto the bottom in exactly the same way. So again, I'm just going to pop the two pieces, or the two edges should I say, together, just to find where the middle is. And I'm going to fold this in half. You might find the easiest way to do it, because you're going to be placing them right sides together, is to fold it so as the right side is on the outside, because then you've got a more prominent fold that will sit in the fold that you've made on your square of fabric. So we pop that on there, and again just pop a pin in, and then again do the same on the opposite side. And then we're ready to stitch them on. I'm just going to give mine a bit of a press before I continue, because there's a lot of bulky seams on the back. So before I measure and possibly trim, I'm just going to give it a little bit of a press. And then hopefully that will enable me to check the size correctly that it's come out as, and trim if necessary. So the size you need it to be is on the pattern. So I'm just going to find my rotary cutter, there it is, and just measure and just see if I need to do any trimming. I think I do need to possibly square it up a little bit, so because I can see where little bits are sticking out. So I'll just twizzle that around. The next step is to start assembling the block. First of all, you'll need C1 and D2, and with these you're going to stitch one of the squares to two of the oblongs. So we just need 4 of these and 2 of the blue. So again, using a scant 1/4 inch, we'll just stitch those on before we get to the next step. Once you've finished stitching, you just need to press the seams. So for these two, I'm pressing the seams inwards to the blue fabric. And then the next part to stitch is your square in the diamond, or diamond in the square should I say, and you're going to put one each of C1 on either side, and then we're going to stitch one of these pieces on one side and one on the other side. And if you've flattened your seams in the right direction, then they should be able to nest quite easily. So we'll just have a quick look at that. So that one will go against that one. And I just like to pop a couple of pins in because it just helps when you're stitching for it not to move. And then we'll pop one in that end as well. And then we'll do the same. Once I've stitched this side on, we'll do the same, and we will stitch this one onto the other end. Taking a pin and a unit from step 6, pop the pin into the corner where the two fabrics A1 meet. Fold the square in a diamond block in half to find the centre point. Then just sort of find the sort of 1/4 inch mark down on your square and just push your pin through. If, like that one is slightly out, so this piece needs to come further up, just pull your pin out again and just pop it in. Just needs to go a little bit lower, I think. Yeah. So I'll just wiggle that a little bit to get it into place. And then I'll just pop some pins in along that top edge, so when I come to stitch it, the fabrics won't move. So again, you're going to stitch a scant 1/4 inch. I'm also going to stitch the opposite one on at the same time. I'll take that one out. So I'm going to pop this one on here as well, and then I'm going to do those two first of all. We'll come back then and have a look because we need to fold them open before we stitch the other two on. There are the first two triangular pieces stitched on, so we're then ready to stitch the other two on the other two sides. So I will stitch those on and then our block will be finished. For the centennial block, you'll need 1 of A1, 4 A2, 2 B1, 1 C1 and 4 of D1. You'll notice with C1 it's going to be a diagonal in the middle of the block, so I have fussy cut one of the butterflies that are on the fabric to fit inside that piece of the block. So for the first step, you're going to need D1, B1 and A2. So first of all, with B1, you're going to need to cut both pieces into 4 triangles. So I'm going to use my revolving mat because it just makes it a little bit easier. And we're going to cut it across the diagonal. Then using fabric D1, we're going to stitch 2 of the triangles onto each of these D1 squares. So you'll want right sides together. First of all, we need to find the centre of the square and of the triangle, because they're actually going to come along and they'll be stitched on like that. So I'll just give that a finger press down the middle. And then with this one, I'm going to press it right sides together so I can see where the two folds are when I put them together, as I say, right sides together. So that will go on that one, and my pins are not around, so I'll just pop a clip in it for now. And then once I've sewn that side on with a scant 1/4 inch, I'll flip it open and just give it a press with my seam roller, and then I'll stitch the other one on the adjacent side. So I'm going to do all 4 of those, and then we'll take a look when they're done. I've just trimmed the little triangles off the back of each of these little units, just to tidy it up and just make it less bulky. So once you've got the 4 of those finished, you then need to find fabric A2, and we're going to stitch one of these to the side of one of these little units that we've just completed. So again, using a scant 1/4 inch seam allowance, I will go and get to the sewing machine and get those stitched on. Once you've stitched on A2, then you just need to press it open. I'm pressing my seam towards the blue fabric. Next, we're on to step 2. So you're going to need fabric A1, and for this one we're going to cut it into 4 triangles. Once you've cut that into 4, you're going to need 2 of the units made in step 1, and we're going to stitch 2 of the triangles either side of both of these. So we'll have one that way and then one that way. When you go to stitch your triangles on, make sure that this bottom straight edge is level with the straight edge on the oblong, and then you're going to stitch it along there with a scant 1/4 inch, so your little triangle is sticking off the end of the white fabric. So there are my 2 corner pieces finished, and I've just given the seams a press with the iron, and they're facing inwards to the centre of the unit. So those are done. We're now ready to do step 3. So you want one of the units from step 1, so one of these, and you need fabric C1. So following the diagram on step 3, we're going to be stitching one side of the centre piece and one the other side. There is the middle part of the block completed. So we're now ready to stitch on our 2 triangles onto each side. I've pressed my seams outwards on the middle part of the block because I want to nest the seams together. So we will be putting right sides together and just nesting those seams in the middle. I'll just put a clip in there and one the other side as well. And then we're ready to stitch them together with a scant 1/4 inch seam allowance. So I will get both of those done, and then when we've finished we'll come back and have a look at the finished block. There we have our finished Centennial block. This block is the homegrown block. For this one you're going to learn how to do a triple triangle square and a diamond in a square. For this block you'll need 2 of A1, 2 of A2, 4 of B1, then you'll need 5 of C1, but you'll notice that I have fussy cut one of the pieces in the diamond shape, which is going to be in the middle of the block, and 2 of D1. So first of all we're going to use the 2 D1 fabrics and the 2 fabric A1. Put those aside. And the first part of the block we're going to do is the triple triangle square. And first of all we're going to make 4 half square triangles using these 2 fabrics, just as we've done before. Next you will need your 4 pieces of C1, and on the back of these I'm going to draw a line diagonally across each of them. Then taking one of your pieces of fabric with the line on and one of your half square triangles, you're going to place them right sides together, but the drawn line needs to be placed on the opposite diagonal of this seam that you've already stitched. So there's my 2 pieces, so I'm just going to turn that around and I'm going to place the top piece with the diagonal line on the opposite side to where it's already been stitched, and then we're going to stitch a scant 1/4 inch either side of these, and I'm going to do all 4, and then we'll come back and we'll open them out and then you can see the triple triangle square. Once they are stitched, you then just need to cut them in half along the line that you drew, and then we'll just press them open. So I'm pressing them with the seam going to the blue side. Then once you've got all those pressed open, you will need to trim them down to the size which is on the pattern. So you should have 8 altogether, and I'm now going to trim them down. Let's trim one of the triple triangle squares. So finding the 45-degree line on your ruler, I'm going to place this line along this edge here which we stitched. Now first of all I'm going to put it on the right hand side edge, as I just want to measure how wide the little square is. Now following the size that you're going to need to cut it to on the pattern, just check what the excess fabric is on with your ruler, so you know how much you need to cut off. Then divide it in two, so you know how much you need to cut from each side. So I'm going to do the right hand side first, and then I'm going to cut the left hand side by moving it round. So it'll become apparent as we go along. So keeping that solid 45-degree line on your fold of fabric or your seam line, I'm just going to move it upwards, and I'm going to move it so the markings on the left hand side of the ruler are half the quantity that I need to cut off from the right hand side. So I found how much I need to trim. So I'm going to trim that piece first of all. And then turn it 90 degrees so you've got the left hand side, which is now the right hand side. And I'm going to place my ruler on again, finding the 45-degree angle, and just place that on where you've stitched on your seam line. And we can see how much we've still got to cut off. This is going to have to be cut from the right hand side again. So I'm going to pop my ruler, so this solid line here is flush to the left hand side, but you can see that the 45-degree angle line is not laying flat above the seam line. So I'm going to move my ruler upwards, keeping the left hand solid line to the left hand side of the square, and placing the 45-degree line along that seam in the middle there. So you can now see that this is how much I need to cut off on the right hand side. So once we've done those two sides, we will just move it 45 degrees. And again, finding your 45-degree line on your ruler, but you'll need to go this way now. So here's my line just here. Again, I'm going to place that in the middle and just measure how wide the square is, so I know how much I need to cut off from each side. So just like we did before, this time we're going to take the ruler downwards, so you have your equal measurement on the left hand side as to what you're going to be cutting off on the right hand side, again with the solid line across that seam line. So I'll trim that end off, and then again just turn it around, and again place your 45-degree angle on the seam line. What you also need to do is make sure that you have got your bottom solid line on the bottom of your square and the left hand solid line on the left hand side and the top one on the top of the square. And again, making sure that you've got your solid line going across the diagonal. So we're now ready then to trim that right hand piece off. And there we have our triple triangle square. So I have done all 8 of mine. So I'm now going to be ready to move on to the diamond in a square. So taking fabric C1 and A2, first of all you need to cut in half across the across the diagonal your 2 pieces of A2. There are my 4 pieces. So taking C1, we're going to stitch 1 piece on each of the edges. So first of all, we need to find the centre of one side. So I shall just fold that in half and just press in the middle there. And I will do the same with one of the triangles, but I'm going to press this so as it's wrong sides together, so I can nest the folds against each other. It's a little bit easier. So we'll pop that on the top and I'll just pop a pin in. Then when I get to the sewing machine, I'm going to stitch that with a scant 1/4 inch, and then I will fold it open and just press it. Then I'm going to stitch the other one on the other side before we move to the final 2 sides. Then stitch the other 2 triangles on to the other 2 sides. There is the diamond in a square little unit finished. We're then going to next move on to step 7, which is assembling the block. So first of all, you need 2 of your triple triangle squares, and we're going to sew them together in the middle in this way round, using a scant 1/4 inch, and then when I've sewn it together, I'm going to press the seams open for these ones. So once you've stitched them, you will have 4 of them all together. So we'll get those done and then we're ready to move on to step 8. There are the 4 units stitched together from step 7. We're now going to stitch one of fabric B1 to either side of each of the sets. There are the 2 units which will be on the top and the bottom of our block. You've then got your other 2 triple triangle square units which you're going to attach to the diamond in a square. So you'll need to stitch one either side. If you fussy cut your centre of your little unit, then make sure it's facing the right way up so as you can stitch these 2 units on correctly. So we're going to match the seams like we've done in previous videos, and then going to stitch those onto that middle part, and then one of these will be stitched on the bottom and one set on the top. Make sure that when you are going to stitch them together that you've got your seams pressed in opposite directions so as you can nest them. So for instance, with these ones, I've got them pressed outwards. When I've stitched these 2 onto the middle section, I'm going to press them inwards so they will nest nicely. Okay, we'll get that done and then we'll come back and have a look at the completed block. There we have our finished homegrown block, and I've pressed it flat, all the seams flat with the iron. This next block is the crow's foot block. For this one, you're going to learn how to do flying geese 4 at a time, half square triangles 8 at a time, and triangle in a corner. Our last block is the crow's foot block. So you need 1 of A1 and 4 of A2, 1 of B1 and 4 of B2, 1 of C1, 1 of C2, 4 of C3, 4 of D1 and 16 of D2. So we're going to start with C1 and D1. So taking D1 first of all, we're going to draw a line diagonally across the back of these pieces. Then using these and C1, we're going to stitch 4 at a time flying geese. So first of all, you want to place 1 of your D1s in right sides together in the top left hand corner, and then a second one in the bottom right hand corner. And I'm just going to pop a pin or a couple of pins just to keep this steady. And then we're going to stitch a scant 1/4 inch either side of this line that's running through the centre. Once you've stitched those on, then either using your ruler and your rotary cutter or a pair of fabric scissors, just cut that in half. And then we're just going to press the little triangles open. So this is the wings for the flying geese. Then taking your other 2 squares with drawn lines on, we're going to place 1 in each left hand corner, bottom left hand corner of these units. And again, we're going to stitch a scant 1/4 inch either side. Once those squares are stitched on, we're just going to cut that in half again. And then you will have 4 flying geese. So we're just going to press this part open on all of them. Then we're going to just measure them, and they may need trimming to the size it says on the pattern. So I'm just going to just check a couple of those and just see if they need trimming. Yes, they do. So we've made them oversized. So it is a little bit easier because they are quite small anyway. So you will need to trim them down to according to the pattern. To trim the flying geese, we're going to use the same method as we do for the half square triangles, but we're going to not worry about the diagonal folds of the fabric, but we're just going to measure the width first of all, see how wide that is, and just check on your pattern how big that piece has got to be. And then I'm just going to trim the right hand side first of all. Then move it round and trim the the right hand side again once we've moved it around. And then we need to do the top and the bottom. So again, just measure the width. And there we have our 4 flying geese finished. So next is step 2, and we're going to be making half square triangles 8 at a time. So you'll need fabric B1 and C1. And on the back of one of the pieces, you need to draw 2 diagonal lines. Place the 2 fabrics right sides together, and we're going to stitch a scant 1/4 inch either side of both of these diagonal lines. So I've stitched both sets of lines, and then we are going to cut in half along the solid line. And again. And then we are going to cut up the middle this way and then across the centre that way. So then that will give you 8 half square triangles. So make sure you've got a solid line on the bottom of your triangle and on the top one as well, just so as you know that you're getting it straight through the middle of those 2 triangles. And just twizzle that round again, just pop those back into place. You could also do them individually, which would probably be a little bit easier, but I have my rotary mat, so I thought I would make use of that today. And there we go. So you've now got 8 half square triangles, so they just need all pressing open, and then we will be ready to move on to step 7, which is the triangle in a corner. If you need to trim these, they can be trimmed, or should be trimmed down to 1 1/4 by 1 1/4 inches. There we have our 8 half square triangles all trimmed. Next we're going to move on to stitching the triangle in a corner unit. So you will want 4 of C3, and you will also want 8 of D2, and you need to draw a line horizontally across each one on the reverse. So taking 1 of C3, we're going to pop one of these on the bottom, and we're going to stitch just shy of this line. So you'll want to stitch it on, if we put it that way, just on the left hand side of that line, just slightly, so when you fold it back you will hopefully get that into the corner. And then once you've stitched that one on and folded it back, you need to trim the excess fabric from the back, so leaving a 1/4 inch seam allowance, and then fold it back, and then you're going to stitch another one on in the opposite corner in exactly the same way. So we're going to do 4 of those using C3. There are our 4 units finished with the triangle stitched on 2 sides of each of the squares. Next you're going to need the rest of D2 and your 8 half square triangles. So we're going to be stitching D2 onto the top of each HST. So following the diagram on the pattern, you'll need to have your half square triangles facing in a certain direction. So we'll do 1 of each. So I've got the dark blue on the bottom and the paler one on the top. And you're going to do 4 of each this way round. And we're going to stitch 1 of D2 on the top of each of these. So as I say, we're going to do 4 of each with the HSTs in this direction. So we have our 8 little units that we've just stitched, which is step number 8. And with 2 of each of them, we're going to stitch a piece of A2 at the bottom of them. So we'll take 2 from that pile and 2 from that pile, and we'll just, as I say, stitch 1 piece underneath each one. Now we are ready to assemble the block. So you're going to need your 4 pieces of B2, and we're going to stitch first of all 1 of the half square triangles with the D2 on the top. So we're going to stitch that on the right hand side, And as you can see, I've got the darker fabric against the darker fabric. So we're going to stitch that on first of all. And then using one of the little units which we have just made, that's got a 2 on the end, we will then stitch that on the bottom of that square. So there are the 4 corner units finished. So now we're going to move on to step 10. So you'll need your flying geese and your triangle in a corner units from figure 7. So we're going to stitch one of the flying geese above one of these little units here. So this is the way round you need to have it. So we're going to do 4 all together. So I'll get those stitched on and then we'll move on to a bit more assembly of the block. We're now going to stitch the units we've just completed in between the units that we've made in figure 9. So we need to do 2 lots of these ones. These are going to be our top row and our bottom row of our block. There are our top and bottom rows completed. So we now just need to do the middle row. So taking your 2 units from step 10, we're going to stitch A1 in between those 2 units. Once I've done that, I'm going to stitch all of them together to complete the block. Once you have finished making all of your blocks, then I would suggest just measuring them all just to see if they are all the same size. So depending on what you're going to actually do with your blocks, I'm going to make mine into a mini quilt, like a wall hanging. You may want to have them all the same size. I'm going to be putting sashing on mine in between, on the bottoms and then in between, just to make it into a mini quilt stroke wall hanging. So I have trimmed all of mine down just slightly, about 1/8 of an inch, I think, for most of them, because some of them were a bit smaller when I'd got them finished. So that's what I'm going to do with mine. Or you could make, if you don't want to do that, you could make some lovely oven mitts, which I've made, which I showed you at the start of the video. The link for these will be in the information at the bottom of the video. If you're going to make a wall hanging with your blocks, you may want to put sashing in between as well, just to spread them out a little bit. I've cut my sashing pieces. Some of the pieces are longer, or wider should I say, than the width of the block. The reason I have done that is because I'm going to stitch the name of each block on each piece of sashing that goes below the blocks. So you can see here, hopefully, that I've stitched Road to Oklahoma for the Road to Oklahoma block. So I'm going to go and do these, and I'm going to assemble them together, and I'm going to put sashing along the top as well as the bottom, because the bottom will have the name of the bottom 2 blocks. And then it will be ready for quilting and binding. Here is my mini quilt all pieced together with the sashing. It's side on the screen because I can't fit it in any other way. I have pinned it, as you can see, so I've made my quilt sandwich. So I've got my batting and some backing, which is approximately 1.5 inches, 1 inch to 1.5 inches wider all the way round. This just helps when you're doing your quilting When you're stitching, it just brings the fabric up a little bit, so it's good to have that excess around your work. I've also prepared my binding, so that will be ready to go on once I finish quilting.